Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 3. Double Fudge Rendezvous. Bella's point of view. I had a really hard time staying coherent today. There was no school, because it was a Saturday, so I had to battle to find tasks to occupy my time with. Alice, gratefully, kept babbling in my ear, which made it near impossible to sleep. I mean, Alice huffed out dramatically, "Everyone in Forks High was at that party, Bella," she said exasperated while I mopped the kitchen floor. "Why the hell wasn't he there? Do you think it was me? No, that couldn't be it. Maybe he doesn't like it. But Edward was there, and he's his best friend. You'd think he'd go to his best friend's party," she whined. At the mention of Edward's name, my attention peaked. I halted my mop and slowly turned towards her. "Hey, Al," I started cautiously. How to ask her this without drawing undue attention to myself? She stopped her tirade at the sound of my voice, and looked at me quizzically from her seat at the bar. This Edward guy you talk about? What's his deal, anyways?" I asked as nonchalantly as possible. I was worried she'd get suspicious and start questioning my motives, so I added, "I mean, if he's Jasper's best friend, I might be more helpful to your predicament if I knew more about the company he kept," I finished craftily. Curiously, Alice grimaced at my mention of Edward. "Well, Edward is..." She trailed off, cocking her head to the side, appearing to be trying to find a good word to explain him. I thought I could help with this. "Gorgeous. Interesting. Has impressive literature collections, and $5,000 black leather sofas. Trouble." She finished decidedly with a nod. I frowned. "Trouble?" I hedged. "Sure, Edward might have seemed a little abrasive, but trouble?" She nodded then continued. Well, let's just say Edward doesn't exactly play well with others," she added cryptically. Figures that the one time I could actually benefit from her overabundance of conversational enthusiasm, and she starts walking on eggshells. "Alice, could you maybe be a little more specific?" I huffed, aggravated that I actually had to ask her to continue. She rolled her eyes. "He has issues, okay? He's a troublemaker. Bad seed. He's mean to everyone but Jasper. He doesn't like talking to people. He's been arrested before. He hates Emmett. He has the foulest mouth I've ever heard, and freshman year he scratched my BMW by accident, and didn't even apologize." She spat in a harsher tone than I was accustomed to ever hearing Alice use. I blanched, a bit shocked at her tone and description of Edward. "He didn't seem so bad last night. Again, a little abrasive, but I know how much sleep deprivation can affect moods, so I can easily write it off." Alice, apparently, couldn't. I felt strongly compelled to defend Edward for some reason, but knew doing so would give me away, so I stuck to my earlier ruse and continued with my false intentions of learning more about Jasper. Well, is Jasper like that too? Mean to people, I mean?" I asked, not really caring. I decided to store the information on Edward away for later inspection. Alice shook her head frantically. No, Jasper isn't like that at all. He parties some, but no more than Emmett. One time when I stayed the night with Rose, I saw him helping his mom with her work. She's a professor at the college in Port Angeles, and he was really sweet to her," she trailed off in a whimsical voice. I just shrugged and continued mopping the floor while Alice pointed out Jasper's stronger points. Hoping to get a better impression of Edward tonight, I decided not to judge him based solely on Alice's assumptions. I knew if he was judging me by others' assumptions, he probably thought I was completely insane. My shoulders slumped a bit when I realized that was probably exactly what he thought of me by now. How could he not, with all the rumors going around school? For some reason I really did want Edward to like me, or at the very least remain on polite speaking terms with me, which, as Alice made quite clear, was more of a rarity than I had originally expected. In a marginally worse mood, I continued cleaning the house for the rest of the day, anticipating another encounter with Edward in equal parts of excitement and dread. At 11 o'clock, I decided to stick to my strengths to win Edward's approval, and came up with a new cookie recipe. As Mee told me once that no one could resist my company when cookies were involved. I was hoping she was being honest as I whipped the fudgy dough and prepared it on the cookie sheet. Alice and Mee, quite tired from her trip to Seattle last night, had already called it a night, and were sleeping peacefully in their beds. I usually felt quite envious of them at this time of night, but I was far too anxious about meeting Edward to give it a second thought. Idly, I wondered how stupid I would feel if he didn't even show up at the gazebo. Then I realized I was sounding too much like Alice, and mentally slapped myself for being such a teenage girl. Once my cookies were cooled, I put them in their Ziploc bags, and labeled them accordingly like I always did. Double Fudge Rendezvous. They looked and tasted delicious, which satisfied me, because I was a very tough critic when it came to such things. I sat myself at the breakfast bar, and drummed my fingers on the granite, while sipping a new cup of coffee. I was officially out of things to do, and I could feel my eyelids drooping against my will. I wondered what time Edward usually went out, and deciding to save my sanity, concluded I would make an appearance at exactly midnight. No need to seem so eager. I mentally slapped myself again for actually being so eager. I took some comfort in the fact there were no green mini dresses involved. Once the clock on the microwave read midnight, I got up and put my hoodie on. Grasping my bag of Double Fudge Rendezvous, I made my way out the back door leading to the yard. It was lightly drizzling outside with just enough moonlight that I could make out the general shape of the gazebo located at the far end of the yard. I looked towards the Cullen house and noticed where I estimated Edward's room to be still lit up. I let out a deep breath and began stumbling my way towards the gazebo through the darkness. It was rather large, with vines running up the sides and spilling onto the shingled roof that covered it. I took the 2 steps up onto the platform, and looked around. I had never actually been out here before. There was a picnic table in the center with benches on either side. I sat with my back to the houses, and looked out towards the little river that extended past the property. My eyes had adjusted enough that I could actually see the reflection of the clouds in the rippling water. All in all, it was a very peaceful place. Edward was partially correct. The slight cold bite of the breeze did keep me coherent, but the soft soothing sounds of the river were making me even more tired. I rubbed at my eyes with my fists, and started eating a cookie, figuring a sugar high wouldn't hurt matters any. I sat there on the bench for a while eating cookies, and watching the river, before I heard soft footsteps coming from behind me. I was initially alarmed before I remembered I was waiting for someone. I slowly turned around on the bench, and saw Edward approaching the gazebo. He was wearing a black leather jacket, and dark jeans. I couldn't make out his expression as clearly as I would have liked, but he didn't seem to have a mean look on his face. He took a seat at the opposite end of the bench I was sitting on without speaking, and stared out towards the river. I allowed myself a moment to do a mental happy dance at the fact he came to spend time with me, considering his reputation for social dysfunction, before I realized he wasn't speaking. He was just sitting there staring at the river. The light breeze was gently rustling his hair, and sending his scent wafting over in my direction. Edward smelled divine. Like soap, and shampoo, and a vague twinge of cigarette smoke that wasn't nearly as repulsive as it should have been. Not really knowing what to do, I remembered my secret weapon. "Cookie?" I asked in a whisper, and slid the bag down towards Edward's end of the wooden table. He looked over at the bag and furrowed his brow. Tentatively, he reached in the bag, and pulled one out, inspecting it, like I was offering him a severed puppy's head rather than a simple cookie. With an annoyed sigh, I reached in the bag, and produced a cookie. I took a bite slowly, showing him he wouldn't collapse in a seizure from eating my confections. He quirked an eyebrow at me, then popped the cookie in his mouth, taking a rather large